Hey, guys, girls. Brad with Vintage Axe Revival. How are you today? Well, I'm going to do a little video on cross wedging. It has been almost 3 years since I've done a cross wedging video, and I'm not very well prepared for it, as usual, but I want to show you what I'm working on here. I already cut the kerfs, okay? But there is something that I didn't do that I want to go back on real quick here. Put you up there for a second. Okay. Here's our handle. We're putting a wattle general on this today. And I forgot one step already. So we have our center kerf cut. And then my customer's request was to cross wedge the axe, but the eye didn't necessarily need a lot of cross wedge. It didn't need to have the wood spread too much front to back. So I made a V cut for the cross wedge so that I could have a little bit thicker wedge in there for better aesthetics, okay? Cross wedging really should be, in my opinion, should be functional and beautiful. And the function is to push this eye wood out towards the end of the eyes a little bit more, okay? But one very important step that I forgot to take is to drill a small hole at the base of your side kerf. Now, the reason for that is it helps prevent the wood from splitting if you were to pound that wedge in a little too far or something happened, it would split that handle. And I've had it happen numerous times where it'll split down here, okay? So I forgot to do that. So I'm gonna do that first, okay? All right, that's just like 1/8 of an inch. No big deal. Okay. Now we're gonna seat the head. Make sure you seat it properly and that you're seating the correct side of the head, especially when you're working with something like a wattle general. One eye is bigger than the other, but on this one, you actually see that it's choked in a little bit right here, squeezed in a little bit right there, versus on this side it is not. Okay, that's your bottom, is this side. Okay, so we already made the handle to fit that, so we're gonna go ahead and seat this. I seat it by hitting the handle on my rubberized floor. I have really dense horse barn rubber flooring in here. It's about 1/4 inch thick. And I seat it until I hear the right kind of thunk, you know? And I'm getting just a little curl of wood there, little curl there, a little curl here. So the head is seated, okay? The reason this head's all taped off is that it is polished. And I want to do everything in my power to try to prevent scratching this head while I'm seating it and while I'm wedging it, okay? So the next thing I do is I place it in my vise so I can measure for my wedges. Okay. And the next step from there, I'm gonna bring you guys a little closer. The next step from there is get out your calipers, okay? Measure your main wedge front to back. Okay, so my main wedge front to back needs to be I have a small piece of tape blocking my sight line here. All right. So 55.4, okay? So get yourself a piece of wood or something and write this stuff down. So 55.4, all right? Now, how do you know how deep or how long, top to bottom, to make your wedge, all right? What I do, I use an old hacksaw blade, okay? And I insert it in, I mark it, okay? And that's how long my main wedge is gonna be, okay? So, I've got that measurement, no problem. Now my side kerf cross wedge is not quite as long. I made it just slightly shorter, about 1/4 of an inch shorter than the main wedge, and I did that on purpose, okay? It reduces the risk of splitting the handle even more, okay? So, you don't have to measure it, you got it right here. It's marked on your hacksaw blade. And you're not gonna measure for your side wedges, your cross wedges, until after you have made your primary wedge. At least I don't, okay? But one thing you do need to do is you need to, let's see if I can get down in here for you guys. You need to measure for the thickness of your wedge. So what I do is I look at how much material I need to fill in on the sides. So that's 2.03 millimeters on that side, 2.03 on that side, and the width of my kerf is about 1.45. So 2.03, 2.03, and 1.4, that's what, 5.5, right? But I don't want to stop there. I don't want to make it a 5.5 millimeter thick wedge. I want it to actually flare the eye wood out at least a millimeter and a half, almost 2 millimeters on each side. So if I need a 5 millimeter wedge, just to 5.5 millimeters, so let's call it 6, to even just fill the gaps, I think it would be smart to make probably about a 9 millimeter thick, maybe 8.5 millimeter thick wedge. But it depends on your wedge material. Now, I'm gonna use a really hard wood. It will not compress much, okay? If you're using a standard wedge that comes with your axe handle, that wood is very soft and it will compress, okay? So it's okay to go a little thicker. But 2.03, 2.03, 1.45. So 2, 4, 5, we're gonna call it 6, right? I'm gonna go with about 8 millimeters, okay? That, in my opinion, is probably gonna be about right for the hardness of the wood that I'm gonna use. Okay, so 8 millimeters wide, we know the length, we know the front to back measurements. So let's cut that wedge. I don't really buy pre-made wedges anymore. Get this out of the way here. I usually make my own wedges or cut my own wedges. So I'll just show you how I do that. I think what we're gonna wedge this with is gonna be walnut. Okay. So we have our piece of walnut. I have a few different pieces here. I have one that's a little heavier and more dense than the other, one that I've been using for wedging. And let's see what else we have down here. We got some paddock. I love paddock. I think that makes a beautiful, nice contrasting wedge. Let's see what else we got. Ooh, we have some purple heart. More walnut. And we have some yellow heart, kind of like Osage orange. I think what we're gonna do is I think we're gonna use paddock. Okay, so I'm torn, but I think we'll use paddock. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is you're always gonna use end grain. You want the grain to run this way, the length of the wedge, okay? Not sideways. So just make sure I have a squared off edge. If I don't, I'm gonna square that off on my belt sander. And then I'm gonna mark the length of my wedge top to bottom, all right? Okay, that's pretty easy, right? Okay. Now, you got to mark it on the side because that's how you're going to be cutting it. Now, I cut my wedges on a bandsaw, and I use a resaw blade. So you'll notice this blade is really thick front to back. It's about a 1/2 inch thick. I think it's 6 teeth per inch or 8 teeth per inch, so it's not a skip blade. It's one that's made for cutting really straight lines in wood. Now, we had talked about doing an 8mm wide wedge. So I'm just going to measure out 8mm. Okay, and then you got to remember there's going to be some room for the kerf or for the cut that you're making, right? The wood you're removing. Right, so I put a little dot up there, right? So I don't normally draw this line, but I'm going to this time for you guys' benefit. And there's your line that you're going to be cutting on to make your wedge, okay? Now, it's really important that you keep this piece of wood flat and level, okay? Here we go. Wish you guys had smell-o-vision right now. Okay, so here's the wedge. All right. Now, it's pretty consistent and pretty straight all the way across. It is slightly longer than it needs to be. It's 9.03 millimeters thick at the top. But what you want to do, you want to square off this bottom edge, right? So get that squared off. Okay. And it doesn't have to be, depends on how thick, how deep, and how wide your kerf is, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be razor sharp and pointy. This one is pretty thin, okay? number one, if you have a super pointy edge, it's going to sometimes get damaged and just fold over anyways. All right. The next step here is we know that 9 millimeters is the thickness we want, right? But at what depth do we want it? Well, you got your handy dandy hacksaw blade, right? So go back to your hacksaw blade, lay it on your wedge, and measure it like this, and mark your wedge on both sides. It's just me, sometimes how I do it. I mean, I don't always do this stuff, but sometimes I do. And mark it on both sides where that's the maximum depth that this wedge will be able to go down into the kerf, okay? The next step is you're gonna measure the thickness of the wedge at that height. So, in alignment with those lines on the ends, right? Because that's how far it's gonna go in. That's where we really want the 9 millimeters. So we're gonna measure that, and it is 9.01. Okay, you guys see that? At that spot, 9.01. And on this side, it's a little thinner. It's 7.78. Okay. My guess is this wedge isn't going to make it all the way in. Okay, it's probably not. But we are going to clean this discrepancy up a little bit. We're going to square it off. Okay. So the way I do that is I go over to my belt sander. Okay. And I just square it off. Now you'll notice I have a metal platen behind here. I'm going to flatten this out a little bit. I'm doing this one-handed because I'm holding the phone here. You need a nice flat surface to strike on, okay? That's important. All right. So, there we have our primary wedge. Now, the next step for shaping your primary wedge is you need to measure it front to back, right? So 55.4 millimeters was our measurement front to back. Now, you can do this really simply by just setting it in here and marking it, or you can measure it. But I like to round the front or point the front of the wedge depending on how it's going to fit the shape of the eye of the axe head. And you need to do that first, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to round off that one edge the way I want it. Okay. Now, also, on a wattle axe especially, the eye is more hourglass shaped than it is just a V, right? But regardless, this thing should not be totally rectangular. you should actually try to take some material off this bottom edge and cut this at a little bit of a slant. Now I should have done that first, but here we go. All right, see how that's at a little bit of an angle now? Okay. So now that I've got one edge rounded and shaped to fit the front curvature of the eye of the axe, I am going to now measure front to back, and then I'm gonna cut this, and then I'm gonna shape that back edge. But remember, if you want to round off that back edge, you do need to leave a little bit of extra material on your wedge, okay? So we're gonna measure the 55.4. Now, the 55.4, that is at the top of the wedge here, this measurement right here. So we need 55.4 on that line, okay? So that's assuming it's gonna go in all the way. So I'm gonna measure 55.4. I'm gonna cut it at 56. I'm gonna cut it at 56 and a half or so I can round it off a little bit. Okay, and I'm gonna mark that right there. And now I'm gonna cut it on the bandsaw. Here we go. I cut the wrong end. But I didn't cut it. I didn't cut it all the way down. So that's embarrassing. We're gonna go to this end here. You know what? Let's just cut that off. Okay, so now our wedge is the exact depth of our curve. Hey, everybody screws up from time to time. Pieces of wood like this, don't try to use your fence to cut straight lines. Just learn how to do it freehand. And I cut a straight line there in lieu of cutting an angled line because I'm going to use this piece that's left over for my cross wedge. This is a piece of dimensional paddock that you can buy from, let's say, Rockler Woodworking. This was 3 inches by 1/2 inch, okay? So you can buy this same wood at Rockler and make your own wedges. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna round this back corner off a little bit, and I'm also gonna then confirm my length front to back at 55.4, okay? All right, so I'll take you back over here. I am going to put just a little angle on that. I'm going to round these edges a little bit. So when you're using, why am I rounding the edges, you may be asking? Well, when you're using a really hard wood, you want to try to avoid, in my opinion, remember this is all my opinion, this doesn't mean this is the only way to do this stuff. See now how it's shaped? It's got a little bit of a slant on the front, a little bit of slant on the back. It's rounded front and back, okay? Now, when you first put this in, it's not gonna fill the whole gap front to back, right? It's only gonna fill part of it. So you kind of have to make sure you center it. All right, so let's just set it in here. Let's get it down so that it's at least into the eye of the axe a little bit, okay? Now we can measure the width of our cross wedges, okay? So what I do is I grab my caliper and I measure the depth of the kerf this way, side to side, and that's 6.92. .97. Okay, so very close. Now, what I've been doing lately, instead of measuring it so much, is you'll take your piece of wood that you have left over for your side wedges and just set it in there and mark it, okay? So the other thing too is make sure that this piece of wood is wide enough to give you the fore and aft expansion that you need. There's about 2.5 millimeters here and about 2 millimeters there. So how much wider is this than am I going to have enough wood? It would appear that I would have enough wood. It's going to be close though, remember. Now remember, the side kerfs aren't quite as long, but because they're so open, now remember we marked on our hacksaw blade the length of our side kerf, okay? So when we look down here, we know that our side kerf or our cross wedge kerf needs to ends there. So what I would recommend is that you just sand that off. Give it a little bit of a point. All right. The other thing you should do while you're here with this piece of wood is flatten one edge, nice and flat. Okay, so we have our piece of wood ready to cut our cross wedges. Now, if you're going to mark it, you got to make sure you use a pen. A pencil's not thin enough to do it. So you simply lay it in there and mark it. Okay, now I'm trying to do this one-handed, which is kind of difficult to do. So there's my little pen mark, right? Now, I cut these freehand on the bandsaw. I'm not afraid of the bandsaw, and I know how to use the bandsaw. And I don't recommend you do this. So here we go. So now we have our cross wedge, one of them. And we have a little bit of a jagged edge, so I'm just gonna flatten that out just a little bit. And I'm doing that on the belt sander, okay? Now, you gotta see if your cross wedge is gonna fit, and it does. And you also wanna make sure that it's going to fill the gap and be flush with the side, okay? Looks pretty good, okay? And then we have our other piece that we already cut off, right? We have a nice flat edge that's going to go against the main wedge. And you can see there that there's only just a little bit that needs to be sanded off or removed. I wouldn't try to cut that on your saw. You would just mark it and sand it off, okay? So you go back over to your belt sander. This is why a belt sander is so valuable and so important. And go over to your situation here and see if it'll fit, okay? Which it does. Fits perfectly, just like that. All right, 31 minutes. Okay, guys. So this is what we have so far, right? We got our main wedge. We know our main wedge is the right length, that if we bottom it out all the way down to the top of the eye wood, that's as far as it can go. We have our cross wedges. If they bottom out, we know that they're in as far as they can go. We know that the cross wedges are thick enough that they're going to give us the expansion that we want front to back, okay? Which is only a few millimeters. This eye doesn't need a lot of expansion front to back. And we know that our main wedge is thick enough at this point that it should give us plenty of, so it's 8.2 millimeters. That it, remember, 5.5 is about the max that we needed to get the wood to expand out to the edge, and we want a little more than that to give it the outward expansion that we're looking for. Now, here's something that's really important. You have to make sure you glue your hardwood wedges. I keep my glue inside in the wintertime, so glue. It's 40 degrees outside today, so pretty crazy that's 40 degrees in January in Minnesota. But the wood I'm using, Tight Bond Extend. Now what that is it has a longer setup time, so it gives you more time to work with it. It's also thinner, so it runs around a little bit more. It's runny, okay? So we're done with our caliper. I'm putting that away. I keep that inside at night too because of the batteries that are in it, right? Okay. Non-alcoholic beer. All right. Now, we need to put glue on our wedges. And then we need to get ready to wedge them or pound them in, right? I made a board, this thing, for wedging. So this is oak. It has a receiver with that rag in it. There's a hole cut there in that second piece of oak that I set the butt end of the handle in. And I pound my wedges from the top down. Some people like to put the wedge on the floor and pound it in. Now, when you're cross wedging, that's pretty difficult to do, to keep an eye on everything, okay? But I set this on the floor, and I'll set the butt end of the axe in there. Now, one other thing that I recommend you get for cross wedging is a plumber's pliers, okay? We're actually going to use this to hold the side wedges, cross wedges, in as we're pounding them in, okay? I know you're like, well, you only have two hands, how are you going to do that? Well, this is how I actually hold the axe, okay? Now, one thing I will tell you, if you don't have the luxury of having rubber-coated floors everywhere, make sure you put a guard on the front of the axe, the bit of the axe, to protect it. Because if you're trying to support it, let's see if I have a guard I could put on there. If you're trying to just support it with those pliers, which you are, pretty good chance it's just gonna slip out of your hands, right? So there have been times when I've had an axe head that's been totally sharpened and ready to go, and I will drop it, and I'll have to resharpen it, and I get irritated with myself for that. So I don't have the type of guard I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for the real thick rubber ones, but that's okay. All right. The other thing I'm going to tell you, get yourself one of these silicone brushes from Rockler, or a woodworking store. They're great for spreading glue. All right. These soft silicone. And then when the glue's dry, you just break the glue off of the little wispy things here. All right. We're going to put glue on our wedges if we can get the wedge out of our glue bottle. I'm going to set you guys down for a second here. I told you I wasn't completely prepared today for this video. I just thought I would do it. So also, along with your plumber's pliers, you're going to want a square roofing hammer. Okay? This is my hammer from when I was a residential roofer for years. All right. So, here we go. We're going to put a little wood on our main wedge. Okay, there was one other thing that I was going to tell you about, and that is have a piece of hard block of wood. This is Purple Heart. It's very hard. And have that at the ready, because you're going to want to maybe pound or seat those cross wedges individually a little bit, sometimes below the height of your main wedge. And that allows you to have something hard that you can set on it while you pound down on it, okay? You don't need a lot of glue. Honestly, you don't. Just a thin layer. Glue up your cross wedges. One thing I will tell you on cross wedges, glue on all four sides, in my opinion. That makes a difference. Okay, apply glue on all four sides. All right. All right. We're ready to set the wedges in the axe head and get going on this. So we're gonna partially seat our primary wedge, okay, and we're gonna insert our side wedges a little bit. Okay. Now while you have it in the vise like this, just make sure you've got your wedge, your main wedge centered. Just give it a few taps and get it down in there far enough that it's centered. Okay. And now it's level with the cross wedges. You guys can see that. Okay. Level with the cross wedges. But your cross wedges are gonna wanna pop out a little bit, okay? So, here we go. I'm gonna show you guys how I do this. If I can get you to, let's see. Oh yeah, it's perfect, huh? Perfect height. So this is what I use that pliers for. I'll actually grip the cross wedges and hold them in. And I'll start tapping both the main wedge and the cross wedges in. Now, I'm just doing little taps right now. I'm not going crazy. Padock, just like a lot of other really hard woods, has a tendency to shatter and break. It already broke vertically. I can see that. So now I'm adding a little more force. Now, what I'm looking for also is what's going on with my gaps here, right? Do I have, you can see there's a little bit of a gap up here still. I want this side wedge to go in further to push this eye wood forward. It's already, I would actually like that on both sides, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I really want to go to town on that center wedge with a bigger hammer and really get it seated. But I also don't want to break off my cross wedges. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this block of Purple Heart, okay, and make sure you pound on it in the right direction, pound on the end grain. I'm going to set that block of Purple Heart just on the edge of that cross wedge. Okay, it's a little harder for me to do it this direction, so I'm going to face it this way. You guys at least know what I'm doing now. Now this can also be when you break your cross wedges off. So you want to make sure you hit them straight down. A good hard whack like that, give you a little extra seating on that cross wedge. I know my hand's in the way a little bit there, guys, sorry about that. But you know what I'm doing. I'm setting the wood on the edge of the cross wedge away from the main wedge so that I can seat the cross wedge further, okay? Now I'm trying to hold the axe up with the butt of my hand, okay? I'm trying to hold this piece of wood and I'm trying to hit this wedge with a hammer all at the same time without hitting my fingers and without breaking the cross wedge, okay? We're gonna go a little bit further with this side now. Okay, we're almost as far forward and back as we want to go. Remember we said they might bottom out? Well, they are. They're getting right to the bottom. Okay, the cross wedges are in as far as they can go. Okay, and I think once we get the main wedge in further, that's going to fill the gap that we need to fill. Now, you can use a little hammer like that for up to this point, right? But this hewing axe is my wedge banger. It's blunt, but it has a nice flat big pole on it. We're gonna really whack the shit out of the main wedge now. Now, here's the problem. It's cracked right here, down. Very easy for this to split and for this piece to flake out and crack right here. I don't want that to happen. So I wanna be conscious of it, okay? So make sure you hit it flat and hard. Whoop. All right, that's it. As far as she's going. And I'm bummed out because we chipped off the edge of that cross wedge, but yeah, it's not the end of the world. Okay. Bring you guys back up here. All right, this is where we're at. Okay. It's got a nice flare mushroom down on the top. And now we're gonna cut it off. We are gonna leave it just a little bit proud. This is a throwing axe, so I won't go real proud. Because if you over rotate the axe and you hit that eye wood on the target, sometimes it'll break and it's not the best. So we're gonna go ahead and cut that off. We're gonna leave about 1/4 of an inch maybe. Lost you there for a second. Sorry about that. Dropped the phone. Okay, so that's after the fresh cut. It's a good tight hang. And now we're gonna sand the top of this, and I sand it with my palm sander. And I'm gonna use 80 grit and just smooth it out. Now, if for some reason you think it needs a metal wedge, I guess do it. But technically, a well hung, a well wedged, a well thought out hang should not need a metal wedge. Okay. That's where we're at, guys. Okay. You want to hold on a second? I'm going to sand this and we'll finish it up. I always put my stuff away as I work. For me, a cluttered shop is a cluttered mind. And Lord knows I don't need a cluttered mind. It's already cluttered enough. All right, 80 grit. Here we go. Okay. Now to clean up the sides, get yourself a razor blade, and all you're gonna do is just go right straight down and just clean that up a little bit. Okay. You don't have to, but I do, because I guess my customers expect it. So that little piece of wood chipped out of there, which I was kind of bummed about, but there's not a lot I can do about it. I could fill it. I could chamfer and bevel the edges around here to aesthetically make that piece of wood that broke off disappear. But again, it's just comes down to how detailed you want to be, guys. How perfect do you want it to be? It does look a little crappy, to be honest with you, with this little piece of wood missing right there. So let's go ahead and chamfer those edges. It'll give me a chance to show you what I use to do that, okay? Now, I used to do it where I would clamp the axe in my vise and do it that way. Now I do it by hand and I hold the axe. So hang on a second. All right, here's the tool. This is the Dremel Multimax MM50. And it is an awesome, awesome tool for this type of detailed work, okay? Now, this is a polished axe head. I could very easily touch the edges and damage my polish job, okay, which would suck, would really suck. So I'm gonna push these pieces of tape down a little bit around the edges here, and hopefully I don't do that, okay? It's actually not gonna work. Let's add a little more tape. What do you say to that? You see it all what I'm doing? There you go. So I'm just gonna put a little bit more blue tape around the edges here. Make sure I don't scratch up my axe head that I spent so much time polishing yesterday. Now, your sander can just burn right through this blue tape, but at least it gives you a visual before you do it, you know? The thing about polished metal is you can touch it with your sanding paper and you won't know it until it's too late. This stuff, on the other hand, it makes noise, it smells, it has different things, different indicators that you're touching the tape, all right? I don't think enough people use enough of their senses when they're working in the shop. I honestly don't. They use their eyes, they use their hands, but you know, your nose and everything else. Being philosophical now, I guess. Huh? So I'm putting 2 layers on because I really don't want to scratch this axe head. This whole chamfered edge or top became really popular. I started doing it a couple of years ago. have kind of since stopped doing it, but because it's a little time consuming. All right. Push your tape down around the edges. Try to make sure it stays in place. It's cold out here, so the glue's not working that great on the tape. Okay. Here's the thing that you got to realize about these things. These sandpapers, they extend beyond the boundaries of this Velcro plate. So where you position this, if you're trying to just use, you know, visually just use the edge, and you don't want this to go, just know where you're putting the pad. Put the sandpaper on right up tight up against one edge and use that edge. Because if it overflaps, if it overflows like this one and it touches your head, then you're going to scratch it. Okay. All right, let's set you up here. So you can see how I do this. Now, the taller that I would, the easier it would have been to chamfer it or bevel it. Would have been a lot easier if this thing was like a centimeter tall, right? Can't probably see crap. So what I'm doing is I'm laying the sander in here and I'm just going along this edge. If I go too far down, too much of an angle, I'll sand right through that tape, right? So you gotta know your limitations there. Now, because this axe head is rounded off on the back, I don't have to worry so much about the other part of this triangular sanding pad touching it, but if it wasn't, I would have to worry about that. Now, you don't want to work blindly. You want to be able to see the side you're working on, right? And once you're happy with the chamfering that you've done on that side, then you're going to flip the axe around. You just don't want to work blind. Okay, that's where we're at right now, guys, okay? We're trying to chamfer that edge over. The reason we're doing it is we broke some wood off of this side, and this is going to help us hide that cosmetic discrepancy, okay? All right, we're going to flip this around and work on the other side now. Now the tape is pushing up here a little bit, so I'm gonna just try to get it to push down a little bit. It's probably not going to. Well, it didn't get all the way down on that side quite far enough to hide our screw up, but we're close. So just thinking on your feet, and an axe is not done until it's done. Really close to totally covering up our little mishap there. Now, one thing you can also do is you can take some of your sawdust from the wood you're working with, and so this paddock, for instance, you could mix some of that sawdust up with some glue, wood glue, and then fill in that little area, let it dry, and then sand it and shape it, and you'll never know. You can make your own little plug. All right, super close. It's looking pretty dang good. Why am I being so picky? Well, this particular customer, he said to me yesterday, he says, "You know what I really love is your cross wedges." If he wouldn't have said that, then I wouldn't be so particular about it. But here we go. We're gonna hand sand this a little bit. This is 150 grit. Now, I did notice that we went down, I think, farther on this side than I did on that side. So I am gonna flip it back around and take this bevel down just a little bit further. Okay. So what we're going to end up with here, guys, is kind of a hump of a high wood, rounded off, beveled, kind of a hump. All right, let's peel all this tape away and see what we got. Alright. Here you go, guys. Chamfered edges all the way around. The front needs just a wee bit more. And it appears as though I did not touch the axe head anywhere. There's a couple little tiny nicks, but those were from something else. But one thing I do like to do is I like to polish this. Because it's such a hard, Padock is such a hard wood, it will actually polish to like a very reflective, like polished finish, okay? And then that allows me to clean up the edges around it if I did scratch it up at all. And you can do that on your polisher, however you normally would polish your axe. Sometimes I'll add a little wax or oil, and then I'll polish it. This axe is already super sharp, so I gotta be careful with it. All right, guys, there you go. Brad with Vintage Axe Revival. That is my cross wedging clinic. Took a long time, took about an hour, right? But hopefully you learned something. Now when you polish wood, okay, you want to always start with a really clean wheel if you're going to do it like on a buffing machine. Because if you don't, if it's dirty, it's just going to jam a bunch of black crap down in there, and you're not going to, it's not going to come out and look, it's not going to look good, okay? But I'm going to do that after this, and you guys can see pictures of it when I post the axe on Facebook and Instagram. So, again, Brad with Vintage Axe Revival, thank you for watching. Hopefully you guys learned something. See you later. Bye.